You ever have those mornings where you walk into the shop and the air just smells like potential? Or maybe that's just the smell of the solvent I forgot to put the lid back on last night. Either way, it's a good day to be a maker. Welcome back to the TigerDen.
See, I thought that smell was more like overdue projects calling your name, but potential sounds much more poetic for the brand.
Let's go with potential. It keeps the creditors at bay. We've got a heavy slate today, Alex. We're talking about the massive shifts in American manufacturing, why you might want to stop being the one under the welding hood, and a little thing called the final boss of guitar repair.
Which sounds intimidating, but knowing you, it probably involves a lot of steam and at least one moment of sheer panic. But before we get to your guitar trauma, congratulations are in order for the folks in Connecticut.
Yeah, huge shout out to Marion Manufacturing in Cheshire. They just bagged the 2026 Connecticut Manufacturer of the Year award. And listen, this isn't just about a trophy for the lobby. These guys are the gold standard for what we're calling agile manufacturing.
Agile. I feel like I hear that word in software meetings all the time. Does it actually mean something when you're literally stamping out metal parts? Or is it just corporate speak for we're working faster?
It's more about the pivot. Most old school shops are like freight trains. They're amazing at going 80 miles an hour in one direction, but if you ask them to turn left, the whole thing derails. An agile shop is more like a mountain bike. They've got their system set up so they can swap from a medical component run to an aerospace order without the owner losing his mind or his profit margin.
So basically, being less of a dinosaur and more of a chameleon.
Exactly. And the big players like Zeckelman Industries are seeing the writing on the wall. They're dumping resources into American-made tubing and conduit because the world is hungry for two things right now: data centers and houses. If you're a fabricator and you aren't looking at the structural steel demand for those sectors, you're basically trying to hunt mammoth with a toothpick.
Speaking of hunting, you were looking at the Global Skills Challenge earlier. You mentioned a trainer named Brandon who's been a CWI, a certified welding inspector, since the late 90s. That's a long time to be staring at seams.
It's a lifetime, Alex. But that's the play. Most young woods or metal guys think the end game is just being the fastest hand in the booth. But Brandon's path, that's the secret sauce. Moving from the person pulling the trigger to the person holding the clipboard.
I can hear the purists screaming already. You want me to stop making stuff and start grading other people's homework?
Look, I love the smell of burning rod as much as anyone, but your knees have an expiration date. Your lower back is a ticking clock. When you get that AWS CWI or CBE, the educator status, you aren't just getting a 30% pay bump, which is real money, by the way. You're buying a future where you can still contribute to the craft without needing a chiropractor on speed dial every Tuesday. It's about being the brain instead of just the brawn.
That's a fair point. It's hard to enjoy your workshop when you can't stand up straight. Let's shift gears to the business side. You've been diving into these government auctions lately. Every time I check your browser tabs, it looks like you're trying to buy a surplus tank or 1,000 slightly used staplers. What's the obsession?
It's the thrill of the hunt, Alex. But seriously, if you're trying to make a living as a maker mogul, the buy is where you win. Most people are out here trying to flip stuff from the clearance rack at the big box stores. That's amateur hour. The real move is sourcing whole pallets of specialized machinery or surplus from government sites.
Okay, but I've seen those auctions. It looks like a great way to accidentally buy a truckload of broken drills and a very expensive bill for a towing company.
Oh, it's a minefield. I once bid on a mixed lot of hand tools thinking I was getting a stash of high-end wrenches. Turns out mixed lot was code for rusty buckets of unidentifiable scrap metal. I had to pay a guy $50 just to haul it away. I basically paid for the privilege of cleaning someone else's garage.
So for the listeners who don't want to pay for that privilege, what's the actual strategy?
3 things. First, you dissect the manifest like a surgeon. Do not bid on a mystery box. If the paperwork doesn't specify the brands and the condition, walk away. Second, you have to factor in the load. Everyone forgets that a great deal on a 3-ton lathe isn't a deal at all if you have to rent a flatbed and a rigger to move it.
And the third?
Tiered pricing. Don't try to sell everything on the same site. You take the cream, the high-end power tools, and you put those on specialized platforms for top dollar. Then you lot out the small stuff to move the inventory fast. Cash flow is oxygen, Alex. If your money is tied up in a pile of hammers in the corner of your shop, you're suffocating.
Speaking of suffocating, let's talk about this final boss project. You mentioned the Epiphone Les Paul Renek project. For those of us who don't spend our weekends surrounded by wood shavings, why is this so terrifying?
Wood is a living thing, Alex. It moves, It has a memory. And when you're doing a neck reset, you're basically performing spinal surgery on a musical instrument. You're using localized steam to melt glue that was meant to hold forever, while trying not to delaminate the wood or ruin a finish that took 40 years to age.
It's the Renneck part that gets me. One slip of the hand, and you've got a very expensive piece of firewood.
Or a very fancy wall decoration. It's about alignment. If you're off by a fraction of a degree, the strings will never sit right, the intonation will be a nightmare, and the guitar will basically be unplayable. It's the ultimate test of patience. It's not about how fast you work, it's about how well you can wait for the heat to do its job. It's a Zen thing.
You doing Zen? I've seen you throw a mallet across the room because a dovetail didn't line up.
True, but even a volcano has a quiet day.
Fair enough. And for the folks who aren't quite ready for spinal surgery on guitars, we saw some pretty incredible drywall work this week too.
Carlos over at Elemento Drywall. Man, watching that guy work is like watching a ballet with a trowel. We tend to look down on basic home improvement, but there's a rhythm and a geometry to high-end drywalling that most fine woodworkers couldn't touch. It's all in the wrist and the mud consistency. If you want to master the DIY world, don't start with the fancy laser-guided marking gauges, though those are cool. Start with learning the flow of the material.
Every time you talk about the flow, I feel like you're trying to turn me into a tradesperson.
That's the goal, Alex. One listener at a time. Whether you're pivoting your shop to be more agile, climbing the ladder to be a welding inspector, or just trying to get a smooth finish on your basement wall, there's a dignity in doing it right.
Well, before you get too philosophical, do we have a final takeaway for the den today?
Yeah, the world is getting faster. Technology is putting lasers on everything, and software is changing how we manufacture. But the person who knows why the metal bends or why the wood moves, that person is never going to be obsolete. Use the new tools, but don't let them replace your eyes and your ears.
Stay sharp, stay safe.
And for heaven's sake, put the lid back on your solvent. See you tomorrow.